Welcome to another deep dive. And today we're going to be unpacking, well, one of those stories that makes you go, wait, how is that even possible? You know,
I know exactly what you mean.
we're talking about the return of the Jews to Jerusalem after their exile in Babylon.
Oh,
And you know me, I love a good historical mystery.
don't we all?
And today's source material, excerpts from a study guide about the Old Testament, gives us the scriptural passages, a little bit of historical info, and even some commentary.
Sounds like a good mix.
It is.
So what's really captivating about this story, I think, is that element of prophecy.
Oh, yeah.
Just imagine knowing 150 years in advance who would not only free your people from exile, but actually pave the way for them to rebuild their sacred city, Jerusalem, and their temple.
Seriously.
Right.
We're talking about the prophet Isaiah, way back in 700 BC.
Wow.
And he's specifically named Cyrus, the future king of Persia,
Why?
as the one who will do all this. The thing is, at this point, Jerusalem hasn't even been destroyed yet, and Cyrus isn't even a twinkle in anyone's eye.
Yeah. He won't be born for over 100 years.
I know. It's crazy.
It really does make you think about the grand sweep of history, and this idea that there might be forces at work that we don't fully comprehend.
For sure.
But before we get too caught up in the prophecy, let's make sure we understand the circumstances of the exile itself.
Okay.
This was a huge turning point in Jewish history, one that would have a profound impact on their religious practices and cultural identity for centuries to come.
It was. Okay, so rewind back to the time period before the exile.
Right.
This is when the people we know as the Jews were still called Israelites.
Right.
And they were living in their own land, the kingdom of Israel.
Exactly. But by the 8th century BC, that kingdom had split into two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south.
Ah, so this is where things start to get a little complicated.
Just a little.
And if I remember correctly from a previous deep dive, it was the northern kingdom, Israel, that got conquered first. By the Assyrians, wasn't it?
You got it.
Okay.
The Assyrians, known for their ruthlessness, conquered the northern kingdom in 722 BC. They deported much of the population, just scattered the Israelites across their vast empire.
That must have been devastating. So what happened to the people who stayed behind in the former kingdom of Israel?
Well, the Assyrians had this policy of transplanting people from other conquered territories, to fill the void.
Right.
So they brought in foreigners and settled them in the land that had once belonged to the Israelites. These newcomers intermarried with the remaining Israelites, creating a mixed population that eventually became known as the Samaritans.
So the Samaritans weren't purely descended from the original Israelites.
Nope.
That's an important detail to keep in mind, especially when we get to their role in the story of the return.
Absolutely.
I can already sense some foreshadowing here.
Oh, yeah. This blending of cultures and religions would become a major source of tension later on. But for now, let's focus on the southern kingdom, Judah.
Okay.
This is where the story of the exile really unfolds.
Judah, this is where Jerusalem was located, the city that would eventually be destroyed and then rebuilt. And I remember from previous deep dives that the Babylonians were the ones who conquered Judah. They were led by, wait for it, Nebuchadnezzar, the same guy who had that dream about the statue made of different metals.
That's the one. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, he laid siege to Jerusalem starting in 605 BC. This marked the beginning of a series of deportations that would send, waves of Judeans, the people of Judah, into exile in Babylon.
It's hard to grasp the sheer scale of this upheaval. Thousands of people forced from their homes, their land, their temple. This is where we see familiar figures like Daniel and Ezekiel emerge. They were among those exiled to Babylon.
Yes, and they both played significant roles during the exile, providing spiritual leadership and prophetic guidance. Daniel, with his gift of interpreting dreams, he actually became an advisor to Nebuchadnezzar himself.
Talk about being thrown into the lion's den, literally. We've done a deep dive on Daniel before, and his story is full of dramatic moments like that. But it was during this period of exile, amidst all the uncertainty and despair, that another crucial prophecy emerged, this time from the prophet Jeremiah.
Yeah, Jeremiah predicted that the exile would last for 70 years. Can you even imagine? An entire generation born and raised in a foreign land, longing for a homeland they had never known. This prophecy would become like a source of both hope and anxiety for the exiled Judeans.
70 years, that's a lifetime. It's hard to fathom the psychological impact of that kind of displacement,
Yeah.
but it seems like even amidst the despair, there were these flickers of hope.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to Daniel, now an old man living in Babylon.
Yes, Daniel, who had dedicated his life to prayer and studying the scriptures, he was nearing the end of his long life in exile. But he never lost sight of that promise of return.
So what did he do? I'm guessing he didn't just sit around twiddling his thumbs.
Not at all. Daniel, having read Jeremiah's prophecy, realized that those 70 years were almost up. And what does he do? He goes into deep prayer, seeking God's favor and guidance.
What a powerful image. An old man far from his homeland, clinging to the hope of return and pouring his heart out in prayer. I'm already sensing that something big is about to happen.
Yeah, you're right to feel the shift in the story.
Yeah.
Because at this very moment, as Daniel is praying, a new power is rising in the east, a power that will change the course of history for the Judeans and ultimately fulfill the prophecy that was uttered centuries earlier. We're talking about the rise of Cyrus the Great, and that's a story for part 2 of this deep dive.
All right, we're back, and I'm still thinking about Daniel praying for his people's return. It's
Yeah.
like, the whole story is just hanging in the balance,
Right.
waiting for, something to shift.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this new power rising in the east, Cyrus the Great. I'm ready to hear how he fits into this whole saga.
Well, think back to that prophecy we talked about. Isaiah predicted that a king named Cyrus would not just free the Jews from Babylon, but he would actually support their return to Jerusalem and the rebuilding of their temple. That's, a level of generosity and religious tolerance that was almost unheard of in ancient times.
Yeah, it's almost like Isaiah's describing someone with a completely different mindset, someone who breaks the mold of, the typical conquering emperor.
Right.
So tell me, what was Cyrus actually like? Did he live up to this prophetic hype?
Well, Cyrus was, without a doubt, one of the most remarkable figures in ancient history.
Okay.
He was a brilliant military strategist who united the Persian tribes and went on to create a vast empire that stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River.
Wow, it's huge.
It is. But what really sets him apart is his approach to leadership.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me the details that made Cyrus, stand out from the crowd of ancient rulers.
Okay. Unlike many rulers of his time, Cyrus was known for his policy of respect and tolerance toward the cultures and religions of the people he conquered. Instead of imposing his own beliefs and customs, he allowed conquered populations to maintain their own ways of life.
Wow, that's a pretty radical concept for the ancient world.
Yeah.
Most conquerors were all about imposing their own culture and religion on everyone else. What motivated Cyrus to take such a different approach?
Well, there are a few theories about this.
Okay.
Some scholars believe that Cyrus saw the strategic value in winning the loyalty of his subjects by respecting their traditions. Others point to his own upbringing, which might have exposed him to a more diverse range of beliefs.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more about Cyrus's background. Was there something unique about his upbringing that might shaped his, worldview?
Well, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, Cyrus's early life was like something straight out of a Hollywood movie.
Okay.
He was actually born into a royal family, but his grandfather, King Astyages of Media, had a dream that predicted Cyrus would one day overthrow him. Talk about family drama.
Whoa. So what did Astyages do? Did he try to get rid of little Cyrus to protect his own throne?
He did. He ordered one of his officials to kill the infant Cyrus, but the official couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he passed the task on to a shepherd, instructing him to leave the baby exposed in the wilderness to die.
Oh, man, that's brutal. But I have a feeling this story doesn't end there.
It doesn't.
Did Cyrus survive this attempted assassination?
He did. And this is where the story gets even more unbelievable. The shepherd and his wife, they found baby Cyrus, abandoned in the wilderness, and they took pity on him. They decided to raise him as their own, keeping his true identity a secret.
Wait, so Cyrus the Great, the future emperor, grew up as a shepherd's son. That's an incredible twist. It makes you wonder if those early years living a simple life close to nature might have influenced his values and his, approach to leadership.
It's certainly an intriguing possibility.
It is.
And it adds another layer of complexity to the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy. Because remember, Isaiah referred to Cyrus as Cyrus the shepherd.
Yeah.
At the time, no one would have guessed that this, seemingly insignificant title would actually reflect Cyrus's humble beginnings.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. The story just keeps getting better. So how does Cyrus go from shepherd's son to emperor?
Well, as Cyrus grew older, his true identity was eventually revealed. And just like in those classic underdog stories, he rose to power, challenging his grandfather and ultimately uniting the Persian tribes under his rule.
So it's like destiny was calling, even from those early days as a shepherd.
It seems that way.
And now this is where the story of Cyrus intersects with the fate of the Jewish people, right?
Exactly. In 539 BC, Cyrus, now a seasoned military leader, set his sights on the mighty Babylonian Empire. And in a stunning military campaign, he conquered Babylon, taking control of a vast territory that included the land where the exiled Judeans were living.
This is it. The moment Daniel has been praying for. The 70 years of exile are coming to an end. So what does Cyrus do? Does he live up to Isaiah's prophecy?
He does, and he does it in a way that's even more remarkable than anyone could have imagined. In his very first year as ruler of the former Babylonian Empire, Cyrus issues a decree.
Okay.
And this decree, it's a game changer for the Jewish people. It's resonated throughout history as a testament to Cyrus's wisdom and compassion.
Okay, I can't wait to hear what this decree says. Lay it on me.
The decree states that the Jewish people are free to return to their homeland, to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem, and to reestablish their lives in the land that had been taken from them.
Wow.
And not only that, but Cyrus even authorizes financial assistance for the rebuilding project and orders the return of the sacred vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had plundered from the temple in Jerusalem.
That's incredible. Cyrus isn't just letting them go home. He's actively supporting their efforts to, rebuild their lives and their religious practices. He's fulfilling Isaiah's prophecy to the letter.
Yeah.
And makes you wonder what was going through his mind, as he made this decision.
You're right to point that out. We can't know for sure what Cyrus's personal motivations were.
Right.
But the impact of his decree is undeniable. It marked a turning point in Jewish history, setting the stage for the return from exile and the rebuilding of Jerusalem. It was like the answer to Daniel's prayers, this glimmer of hope in a time of such uncertainty.
Can you imagine what it must have been like for the Jewish people to hear this news after, decades of exile?
Yeah.
It must have felt like a miracle, like a dream come true.
Absolutely. The decree sparked a wave of excitement and anticipation among the exiled community. After years of longing for their homeland, they were finally given this opportunity to return. And it wasn't just a matter of going back to the place where their ancestors had lived. It was about restoring their religious and cultural identity. It was about rebuilding the temple that had been the center of their faith for centuries.
So who led this momentous return? Was it someone we've already talked about, like Daniel or Ezekiel?
Well, while those prophets played a crucial role in maintaining hope and spiritual guidance during the exile, the leadership of the return, that fell to a new generation.
Good.
A man named Zerubbabel, a descendant of King David, emerged as the key figure in organizing and leading that first wave of returnees back to Judah.
Zerubbabel, a descendant of King David. That's significant.
It is.
It's like a direct link back to the golden age of the Jewish kingdom, a symbol of continuity and, the promise of restoration.
Exactly. And under Zerubbabel's leadership, nearly 50,000 Jews made the long and arduous journey back to their ancestral land. Think about what that must have been like. A massive caravan of people carrying their meager belongings, their hopes, and their dreams, traveling hundreds of miles across challenging terrain.
Wow, it must have been an epic journey, full of, challenges and uncertainties. What was it like when they finally arrived back in Jerusalem?
Oh, I bet there were tears of joy and songs of praise. But the reality they faced was also daunting. The city of Jerusalem was in ruins, the temple lay in rubble, and the land had been neglected for decades. It was a far cry from, the glorious kingdom of their ancestors.
So they're back in their homeland, but they have this massive rebuilding project ahead of them. What were their first steps? Where did they even begin?
Well, the first priority was to reestablish a sense of community and religious practice.
Okay.
Remember, for 70 years, they had been living in a foreign land, trying to preserve their faith amidst the influence of, Babylonian culture.
So it was about more than just bricks and mortar. It was about rebuilding their spiritual foundation, their, sense of identity as a people.
Exactly. And that's where the rebuilding of the temple becomes so central to their story. The temple wasn't just a building, it was the heart of their religious life. The place where they connected with God.
Right. It's like they were rebuilding their connection to God brick by brick. It must have been an incredibly moving and inspiring endeavor.
It was. And within a year of their return, they laid the foundation for the second temple. The scene is described in the book of Ezra as this, mix of overwhelming joy and bittersweet sorrow.
Why bittersweet sorrow? I understand the joy, but what was causing the sadness amidst this momentous occasion?
Well, many of the older generation, those who had actually seen the glory of Solomon's temple, they wept when they saw the foundation of this new temple. It was a reminder of what they had lost, of the former grandeur that they would never fully recapture.
That makes sense. It's like they were looking back on a golden age, a time of prosperity and national pride that had been shattered by the Babylonian conquest.
Right.
But at the same time, they were also looking forward with hope, right?
Yes.
This new temple represented a fresh start, a chance to rebuild their lives and their faith.
You've hit the nail on the head. It was a time of both reflection and anticipation. But as we'll see, the rebuilding process was far from smooth sailing. They faced challenges from within and from without. Challenges that would test their resilience and their commitment to the task at hand.
Sounds like there's more drama to come. And I have a feeling those Samaritans, the folks with the blended religious heritage, might play a role in this unfolding story.
They might.
But we'll have to save that for part 3 of this deep dive.
Yeah.
Stay tuned, because it's about to get really interesting. Okay, we're back, and I am so ready to hear what happened next in this whole saga of return and rebuilding. You left us hanging with that image of the Jewish people laying the foundation for the Second Temple, and it's like tears of both joy and sorrow.
Right. It was a very complex moment.
It was, but you also hinted that there were some stormy seas ahead.
Yeah. And remember how we talked about those Samaritans?
Yes.
The folks who were descended from, that mix of Israelites and the foreigners who had been brought in by the Assyrians? Well, they kind of entered the picture now in a way that really adds a layer of complexity to the whole story.
Yeah. I was wondering when they'd pop up again. It's like, a historical soap opera.
Yeah.
With all these different groups and their intertwined backstories. So what did the Samaritans have to do with the rebuilding of the temple?
So when they heard that the exiled Jews were returning and starting to rebuild their temple, the Samaritans, they actually approached Zerubbabel and offered to help.
Really? That seems, surprisingly generous considering the history between these two groups. What was their motivation?
That's where things get a little bit interesting. The Samaritans, they claimed that they too worshiped the God of Israel and wanted to be part of this huge project. They saw themselves as sharing a common religious heritage with the Jews.
So they were trying to, emphasize their shared roots, their connection to the God of Israel.
Right.
But I have a feeling there's a little more to this story, right?
I think you're right about that.
The Samaritans had their own unique religious practices.
Exactly. And this is where the tension starts to build. Remember, the Samaritans had developed a syncretistic religion.
Okay.
They were blending elements of Israelite faith with their own pagan beliefs and practices.
So it wasn't pure monotheism like the Jews practiced. It was more of a religious melting pot with influences from different traditions.
Exactly.
Okay. I can see how that might have raised some eyebrows among the returning exiles who were deeply committed to the purity of their faith.
Yeah, and Zerubbabel and the other Jewish leaders, they were definitely wary of the Samaritans' offer.
Makes sense.
They were concerned that allowing the Samaritans to participate in the rebuilding of the temple would compromise the integrity of their worship, and the sanctity of the project. They had just returned from decades of exile, where they'd clung to their faith amidst the pressures of Babylonian culture. They weren't about to let their hard-won religious identity be, diluted now that they were back in their homeland.
Right. They were trying to rebuild their nation, their temple, their very identity as a people.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't risk, compromising their core beliefs,
Yeah.
especially when it came to something as sacred as the temple.
Absolutely. So despite the Samaritans' insistence that they, shared a common faith, Zerubbabel politely but firmly declined their offer of assistance.
Uh-oh. I bet that didn't go over so well. The Samaritans had already been living in the land for centuries.
Right.
And now they were being excluded from this major religious and national project. I can't imagine they took that rejection lying down.
You're right to be suspicious. The Samaritans were furious. They felt slighted and marginalized, and they weren't about to let this go unchallenged. So they decided to use their political connections and their knowledge of the Persian bureaucracy to undermine the rebuilding efforts.
Oh, talk about a plot twist. So the Samaritans, who had initially offered to help, now become the main antagonists in the story. It's like Shakespearean drama unfolding in ancient Persia.
Yeah.
How did they try to sabotage the project?
Well, they launched a whole campaign of misinformation and slander, writing letters to the Persian court accusing the Jews of sedition and rebellion.
Oh, wow.
They claimed that the Jews were rebuilding the temple as, like, a fortress.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like a base from which they could launch an uprising against the Persian Empire. And they even hired advocates to lobby against the Jewish cause in the Persian court.
Wow. So they were playing hardball, using like all the tools at their disposal to try and, derail the rebuilding project. Did their tactics work? Did the Persian authorities, buy into these accusations?
Sadly for the Jews, yes. I mean, the Persian Empire was vast and complex, and the rulers relied on this, network of officials and administrators to maintain order.
Right.
And these officials were often susceptible to, bribes and political maneuvering. And remember, the Persians were still relatively new to ruling this region. They were understandably wary of, any potential threats to their authority.
Right. So the Samaritans' accusations, even if they were fabricated, like played into the Persians' anxieties about maintaining control over their newly acquired territories.
Absolutely.
Like a classic case of political manipulation.
It is. And the result of all these machinations was that the rebuilding of the temple was effectively stalled for the remainder of Cyrus's reign. It was a huge setback for the returning exiles who'd poured their hearts and souls into this project.
That's heartbreaking. They finally make it back to their homeland. They start to rebuild their lives, their temple, and then bam, political intrigue and, religious rivalry brings everything to a grinding halt. It must have felt like a crushing blow.
It was a very difficult time for the Jewish community. And to make matters worse, their own internal divisions and lack of focus actually contributed to the delay.
Wait, what do you mean? I mean, they were facing opposition from the Samaritans and the Persian authorities. What more could go wrong?
Well, with the temple project stalled, many of the returning exiles kind of turned their attention to their own personal affairs. They focused on rebuilding their homes, establishing their farms, reestablishing their economic livelihoods.
So they were just trying to, get their own lives back on track after decades of exile.
Exactly.
That's understandable. But I can see how this shift in focus might have created tension within the community.
It did. And that's when the prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, they emerged during this time. And they delivered this really powerful message to the people, urging them to reprioritize the rebuilding of the temple. They reminded the people that their spiritual well-being was inextricably linked to the restoration of their sacred space.
So these prophets were like the conscience of the community, like calling them back to their higher purpose.
Exactly.
Did their message resonate with the people? Did they manage to get the rebuilding project back on track?
Yes, their message did resonate. And here's where a bit of divine providence kind of enters the picture.
Okay.
After the death of Cyrus and his son, Cambyses, a new Persian king, Darius, he came to power.
Okay. New king. That always shakes things up.
It does.
Was Darius sympathetic to the Jewish cause?
Well, it seems like fate was on the Jew side this time. During his reign, Darius discovered the original decree that Cyrus had issued, authorizing the rebuilding of the temple.
Wow. Talk about finding a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
What was Darius's reaction to this discovery?
He was impressed by Cyrus's wisdom and generosity, and he actually upheld the decree, ordering the Samaritans to cease their opposition and even provide support for the rebuilding efforts.
Well, that's what I call a reversal of fortune. After years of delay and frustration, the project was back on track. And this time, they even had the backing of the Persian king. Did they finally manage to complete the temple?
They did. In 515 BC, the second temple was finally completed, a testament to the perseverance and faith of the Jewish people. It wasn't as grand or opulent as Solomon's temple, but it was a symbol of hope, this beacon of their restored identity.
Wow, what a story. From prophecy to exile to return, from setbacks to triumphs. It's an epic journey filled with drama and intrigue and, spiritual significance. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on this period of biblical history.
Yeah, and it's not just about the past. It's a story that speaks to that enduring power of faith, the importance of resilience in the face of adversity, and those unexpected ways in which seemingly disparate events can, converge to shape the course of history.
It really does. You've given me a lot to think about. I'm left wondering about the role of, seemingly ordinary people in the grand scheme of things. Like Cyrus, who wasn't even a believer in the God of Israel, but played a pivotal role in, fulfilling a prophecy and enabling the Jewish people to return to their homeland.
It's a good reminder that we might be a part of something much larger than ourselves, even if we don't fully comprehend it at the time. And who knows, maybe centuries from now, someone will be doing a deep dive into our own lives, tracing those threads of history that connect us to something truly remarkable.
That's an awesome thought. Well, we've come to the end of this deep dive, and I have to say it's been one of the most captivating journeys we've taken together. Thanks for being such a fantastic guide through this fascinating chapter of history.
It's been my pleasure. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those big questions. You never know what amazing discoveries await you.